Here's something that confuses almost every man who's ever tried to figure it out. The men who work hardest to impress a younger woman are almost never the ones she actually ends up interested in. And the men who barely seem to be trying, who couldn't care less whether she's impressed or not, are the ones she can't stop thinking about. It feels backwards. It feels like it shouldn't make sense. But once you understand what's actually happening underneath it, it makes perfect sense, and it's about to change how you carry yourself in every room you walk into. Let's start with the tragedy that plays out constantly, because understanding the failure mode is the fastest way to understand the fix. A man meets a younger woman he's genuinely drawn to. Something in him panics slightly, some old instinct that tells him he needs to prove something, needs to earn his place in the conversation. So he starts performing. He tells better stories than usual. He laughs a little too readily at things that aren't especially funny. He asks eager questions and leans in a little too far, a little too fast. He's not being dishonest exactly, he's just trying, visibly, obviously trying, and that visible effort is precisely the thing that pushes her away, even though it's coming from a genuinely good place. Here's why this backfires so consistently. Effort, when it's visible, signals something underneath it that most men don't intend to communicate but end up communicating anyway. Scarcity. On some subconscious level, that this particular interaction matters enormously, that there's a real fear of losing it, that the man doing the performing believes he needs this specific outcome to feel okay, and scarcity, no matter how well dressed or well spoken it comes wrapped in, reads as need. Nobody at any age finds visible need attractive, no matter how much surface level charm is layered on top of it. Now compare that to the man who stopped trying so hard. And let's be precise about what that phrase actually means, because it's often misunderstood. It doesn't mean he stopped caring, stopped being kind, stopped putting effort into being a decent, engaged conversational partner. It means he stopped needing the outcome. He's genuinely fine either way. If the conversation goes well, wonderful. If it doesn't, he'll be exactly as content as he was 5 minutes earlier. That specific quality, contentment independent of outcome, is one of the rarest and most magnetic traits a man can bring into any interaction, and it becomes exponentially rarer and therefore more magnetic the older and more self-possessed a man actually is. Younger women specifically are drawn to this for reasons that go deeper than simple attraction to confidence. Think about the men a younger woman has typically been surrounded by throughout her 20s and 30s. Men her own age, many of them still figuring out who they are, still carrying real insecurity about their place in the world. Still, whether they'd admit it or not, performing for validation constantly, on social media, in careers, in relationships. That performative anxiety is the water she's been swimming in her entire adult life. It's familiar, and familiarity in this specific context doesn't breed attraction. It breeds a kind of exhausted recognition. An older man who genuinely isn't performing represents something she may have rarely encountered before. Not because older men are inherently better people, but because a man who's lived enough life has usually already gone through the process of caring intensely about outcomes he couldn't control, watching that caring cost him something, and slowly learning to release his grip on needing specific results from other people. That's not a personality trait you're simply born with. It's something built through decades of actual living, through disappointments survived, through enough experience to know that the world keeps turning regardless of how any single conversation goes. Let's get into the specific behaviors that signal this quality, because stop trying so hard is useless as advice if you don't know what it actually looks like in practice. The first behavior is comfortable silence. A man who needs to impress someone fills every pause immediately, almost reflexively, because silence feels like danger, like a gap where disinterest might creep in if he doesn't keep talking. A man who's genuinely at ease lets silence exist without rushing to fill it. He trusts that a quiet moment isn't a crisis that needs managing. This single behavior, more than almost anything else, signals real security, because performing anxiety about silence is nearly impossible to hide no matter how good your words sound otherwise. The second behavior is not laughing at everything. This sounds small, but it matters enormously. A man trying to win someone over often laughs generously at things that aren't particularly funny because he's subconsciously trying to create warmth and rapport through agreement. A man who isn't performing laughs when something is actually funny to him and stays composed when it isn't. This might sound like a minor distinction, but women notice it almost immediately because genuine laughter and performed laughter have a completely different quality, a different rhythm, a different sound, even if most people couldn't articulate exactly what tips them off. The third behavior is asking questions out of actual curiosity rather than to keep the conversation moving forward. There's a specific difference between a man asking a question because he's genuinely curious about the answer and a man asking a question because he's afraid of a lull and needs anything to say next. The first kind of question comes with real follow-up, real engagement with whatever answer comes back. The second kind often gets a half-listened to response before the asker moves on to his next prepared line of conversation. Women, especially women who've had plenty of experience being on the receiving end of performative interest, can tell the difference almost instantly. The fourth behavior is being willing to disagree. A man trying to impress someone tends to agree readily, nod along, find common ground wherever he can, because disagreement feels risky when you're trying to be liked. A man who isn't performing shares his actual opinion even when it diverges from hers, delivered without hostility but also without any anxious softening. This single behavior does more to establish that a man has a genuine independent self than almost anything else he could say or do, because agreeableness taken to its logical extreme starts to look like a man who doesn't actually have opinions of his own, just a desire to be liked. The fifth behavior, and maybe the most important one, is being comfortable letting the conversation end. A man who needs the interaction to succeed will often extend it artificially, finding one more thing to say, one more question to ask, reluctant to let a natural stopping point actually be the stopping point. A man who's genuinely secure lets conversations end when they're ready to end, without anxiety, without stretching them out of some fear that this might be his only chance. Ironically, this specific quality, the willingness to let something end naturally, is often exactly what makes a woman want to continue it. Scarcity created through genuine indifference to outcome is far more powerful than scarcity manufactured through playing games or pretending to be busy. Now, here's the important nuance that separates this from the manipulative dating advice that circulates constantly online, the stuff about deliberately withholding interest as a strategy, playing games to seem unavailable, performing indifference as a calculated tactic. None of what we're talking about here works if it's performed. A man who fakes not caring, who's secretly desperate underneath a constructed veneer of nonchalance, comes across as even more transparently needy than a man who's simply honest about being interested. Because now there's an additional layer of dishonesty women can sense even if they can't name it precisely. The entire power of this quality comes from it being real, not from it being a clever technique layered on top of genuine insecurity. This is exactly why age and lived experience matter so much here, and why this particular quality is genuinely, structurally harder for younger men to access, no matter how much dating advice they consume. You cannot shortcut your way to authentic indifference to outcomes. It has to be earned through actually surviving enough disappointments, enough rejections, enough moments where something you wanted badly didn't happen, and life continued anyway, mostly unchanged, your sense of self mostly intact. A man in his 50s, 60s, 70s who's lived through real loss, real setbacks, real disappointment, and come out the other side still functional, still capable of joy, has built something that simply cannot be faked or rushed by a younger man still early in that particular education. This is also why younger women often describe older men who carry this quality using words like grounded or settled, words that point directly at this exact trait. They're not describing physical attraction primarily, though that's certainly part of it. They're describing the relief of being around someone whose entire emotional state doesn't seem to hinge on how the conversation goes, someone who brings a kind of stability into the room that's genuinely rare and genuinely valuable, especially to someone who may have spent years surrounded by men still visibly anxious about their own worth. So here's what I actually want you to take from all of this. Stop trying to manufacture indifference as a technique, because that path leads straight back into the same performative trap we started with, just wearing a different costume. Instead, focus on the real thing underneath it. Ask yourself honestly whether you actually need this particular interaction to go a specific way, or whether you can genuinely be at peace regardless of the outcome. If you're not there yet, that's completely fine. Most men aren't. But the work isn't learning to act like you don't care. The work is building enough of a full, satisfying life outside of any single interaction that you genuinely don't have to. That's really the whole secret sitting underneath everything we've covered today. The magnetism younger women describe in older men who've stopped trying so hard was never actually about trying less in the interaction itself. It's about having built enough of a life outside that interaction that no single conversation, no single outcome carries the weight of your entire sense of worth anymore. That's not a technique. That's just what a genuinely well-lived life eventually produces. And it happens to be one of the most attractive qualities a man can possess at any age to anyone. If this gave you something worth sitting with, stay close, because next time we're covering why she keeps circling back to you throughout an entire evening and what that specific pattern actually reveals once you learn to see the whole shape of it.